David Malpass is the president of the World Bank Group, and yesterday he delivered an opening remarks at the ongoing World Bank IMF annual meetings in Washington. Very sobering facts and figures he delivered. If you're interested in knowing where the world is heading, take a listen.
There's an urgency to what we're doing because of the challenges facing development. Part of it is global growth is slowing, investment is sluggish, manufacturing activity is soft, and trade is weakening. The challenges of climate change and fragility are making poor countries more vulnerable. This backdrop makes our goals of reducing extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity even harder. About 700 million people still live in extreme poverty. That's about 1 in 12 people on the planet. Here's the good news. Broad-based growth is possible for countries. With the right mix of policies and structural reforms, countries can unleash growth that's broadly shared across all segments of society. This is especially true in emerging markets and developing countries where well-designed reforms can deliver meaningful gains. In short, we see material impact in terms of broad-based growth, transparency, the rule of law, and private sector expansion. We need to be careful how we calibrate our response to the global slowdown. Many countries have already used up their fiscal and monetary policy space, so structural reforms are essential. Over $15 trillion in bonds have zero or negative yields, which amounts to frozen capital. Debt has climbed to troubling levels. We need fresh thinking to reignite growth. At the World Bank Group, we're staying focused on our mission. We're helping countries build strong programs tailored to the unique circumstances of their economies. We're encouraging innovations that attract private sector investment, such as digital money. We're promoting the rule of law and transparency in debt management and public finances. We're investing to help countries gain access to electricity and clean water, to ensure the full inclusion of girls and women, to address climate change and protect the environment, to improve health and nutrition, and to bolster infrastructure. Later today, we'll highlight the importance of education. We're launching a new approach to measure learning. It looks at the proportion of children aged 10 who can read and understand a basic story. We want to reduce learning poverty as much as possible. As we do every 3 years, we're discussing with our member countries how to replenish the financial resources of IDA, the International Development Association, which is our fund for the poorest countries. The proposed replenishment directs more funding toward people in fragile and conflict-affected situations and reaffirms our commitment to projects that benefit the climate and promote gender inclusion. I look forward to the continued support of our donor countries for IDA, which plays a leading role in reducing extreme poverty. This week, I'll have a simple message for countries. The choices you make now matter. Well-designed structural reforms are needed to unlock growth and build the foundations for future prosperity. Problems include oligopolies, excessive public sector employment and pension promises, and subsidies for goods, services, and financing. I'm aware of the strong resistance to many reforms, but they're crucial for enabling broad-based sustainable growth. We've been pleased to see the relationship between the countries looking very actively toward peace and how to find peaceful relations in that part of Africa, and it's happening elsewhere, as you noted. On the other side, there's been sluggish investment. So we have this very challenging situation of population growth in some countries, a lot of young people looking for jobs, and not the investment or the systems to create enough jobs. So we work hard on that. That involves the rule of law, which is so important, and we work specifically with countries on on how they can improve their structure, and that brings me right into the role of women. They're half the population, often producing half or even sometimes more than half the GDP, and yet often not recognized, not allowed within the structure of the economy, either without documentation from their national authorities, without maybe the ability or the right to have jobs in equal measure with men, or to own property in the same way. And so we work very specifically on those issues. We have a big program. We have a report called Women, Business, and the Law, which gets specific on the things that countries can do and are doing. I'm pleased by some of the developments. We do see progress being made in some countries with actual changes in law, and then the implementation of that change in law. So the reason, and then if I may connect that back to the economy, if you have women and if you have girls that can be educated, women that can participate in the economy, you have a much better chance of getting a growth rate that is sustainable for the countries. We're not at that point now, and that's I began my remarks today with the point that there's a big urgency in getting the laws right and the systems right, so that more people can participate within their economic development. The questions on electricity, which is so important for people, in empowering people and in allowing new entrants into the market, women, small businesses, and so on, to connect to machinery, to the internet, to various ways of economic development. So we put a lot of emphasis on trying to have 24/7 electricity in as many places as possible, more people connected to grids than are currently connected. And this is one of those where some progress has been made, and yet lots more needs to be made, especially in Africa. As far as the specific projects, one thing I do want to mention, debt sustainability becomes very important as countries think about how the investments in electricity can be made. If there's already a lot of debt, maybe it's legacy debt that's left over from past projects, it makes it difficult to have the new investment that's needed in order to get transmission and distribution systems running. I don't have comment on the specific with Nigeria. We're involved in a lot of countries on trying to have improvements in the structure of their state-owned enterprises or of their electricity systems so that they work. And particularly in West Africa, I think there can be a lot of progress made in terms of connecting more people and having more dependable power.
David Malpass, the president of the World Bank Group. So let's take a listen to the managing director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, about the new global policy agenda, which was launched yesterday, regarding what the world should do moving forward on the policy side of things. Take a listen.
As I was walking, feeling the somewhat chilly fall weather, I thought of my favorite Russian poet, Alexander Pushkin, and I want to start with a line from him. The breath of autumn begins to ice the roadway. And it is unfortunately appropriate to start with it given the global outlook. We, as you know by now, are forecasting slower global growth this year and next, 3% in 2019, 3.4% in 2020. In both cases, this is a downgrade vis-à-vis the forecast we shared with you in April. Measured by GDP, nearly 90% of the world is experiencing slower growth. And as I said last week in my curtain raiser speech, this means the global economy is now in a synchronized slowdown. Fractures driven by trade, driven by uncertainty surrounding geopolitical tensions and Brexit, they're holding back growth and they're causing hazards in this shared road we are traveling on. They're slowing us down. So what can we do about it? Jerry has already mentioned that we have distributed the global policy agenda. You all have it. And it spells out succinctly what we recommend. We see 5 priorities. The first is to undo the harm on trade and find a lasting solution that will help us build a stronger trading system. I was encouraged by last week's announcements from the US and China. Our meetings this week are an opportunity for all parties to make progress in moving from a trade truce to a trade peace. Second priority is to use monetary policy wisely. Accommodative policy remains appropriate in many countries. It has to be underpinned by independence of central banks and also communicated clearly. At the same time, we cannot ignore the financial stability risks that come with prolonged low rates. And that takes me to my third priority: enable fiscal policy to play a more central role. Now is the time for countries with room in their budgets to deploy or get ready to deploy fiscal firepower. Of course, with global debt levels at record high, this advice will not work everywhere. What can work everywhere, though, are structural reforms, my fourth priority. Lagging productivity calls for measures to achieve stronger, more inclusive, and more resilient growth over the medium and long term. We ought to find ways to lift up productivity. From cutting red tape to boosting female labor force participation, there are a range of measures that countries can take so they can invest in a stronger, more dynamic future. And we have to be mindful of potential losses from automation, dislocation from trade, aging populations. They actually make the need for reforms even more urgent, and the attention to the social cost of reforms even more pressing. My fifth and final priority is to promote stronger international cooperation, and that extends well beyond trade. From financial regulatory reform to addressing climate change, to safely adapting to fintech, to fighting money laundering, so many of our challenges do not respect national borders. Our solutions to these challenges must operate by the same principle of cooperation. We at the IMF have the responsibility to be at the center of the global financial safety net, and it is a good example of international cooperation working really well. I am encouraged by our members' efforts to ensure that the fund remains adequately resourced and that governance reforms continue. And we hope to have more on this topic to share with you during these meetings. Before I conclude, I have one more additional bit of news. I am very pleased to announce that beginning January 1st, 2020, all IMF publications in digital formats will be made available to the public for free. And this is a small way in which we serve the people of our 189 member countries. So what is my goal for the days ahead? I want to make progress in all of the areas I have outlined this morning, and in the process to secure a safer and more efficient journey on the challenging road ahead.